we've all heard, with in Mesa County, Montrose County, the stir of the monument and what's going on up there. We have already in Congress the NCA, the National Conservation Area, and John Whitney's here, and so is Naomi Dobbs, right? Dobbs with Congresswoman Boebert and Senator Bennett's office, and then also Amber Clark, who has also worked on this for the last 14, 15 years. But really, it's more of just to open up the conversation of what or how do we feel that we need to proceed to make sure that we get this thing moving forward and hopefully get this thing done and passed by the end of the year.
I can grab the Joe. Well, I think one of the issues is I don't know how many people realize the difference between an NCA and a national monument, and what the monument carries against what the NCA stands for. And I don't know how many people that really understand the issues. So that was kind of my reasoning for wanting to sit down and see where we're at. I don't know where Boebert is on the NCA. She supported us, and now we don't know. So maybe you could talk towards that. But
I'd be happy to.
we just, kind of feel like the red-headed stepchild at this point because we don't know where we're at. It doesn't seem like, correct me if I'm wrong, that we have Boebert's support on this to carry it on through the House. That's where we're stopped. We made it through the Senate and no opposition, and now we've spun out. So can you enlighten us on that?
Well, I'll do my best. As you know, I work in the district, so the office I work out of is in Durango, and I'm the Southwest Colorado Regional Director for the Congresswoman. So I don't have the overarching view that they might have in DC, but this question has been specifically addressed. And so I appreciate the opportunity to kind of set the record straight as far as where the Congresswoman stands. She is very in support of the NCA and has not lost any of her intent or will or effort to see that it is passed. So that is, if it's a lack of communication, that I will take responsibility for that. The letter that was written February 28th, I will say that I didn't get a copy of it in advance, and there was no advance conversation with the Southwest District Office, but I did receive it after it was submitted to the committee. My understanding on the bill itself is that we're no different than the intent at the onset, which is that there should be a companion bill from the House and the Senate that move together to expedite the passage. My update that I've received and I've shared with the commissioners is that there was a snag, and John Whitney can speak to that here himself. But what it was conveyed to me is that there was a last-minute conversation, which is of course referenced in your letter, from a stakeholder that had to do with uranium. I first want to give you a little context. It is not a surprise that the uranium stakeholders weren't at the table for the past 10 to 15 years, because in fairness and in context, uranium just wasn't viable or economic. However, that's changed, as we are all aware, over the last 6 months. And so now, where there wasn't a will to pursue that resource or asset, there's not only a will, but it has become an economical endeavor. So people in that industry are scrambling to, acquire and get up to speed. So we can talk about that in more detail if you'd like, but that stakeholder did approach Bennett's office, as the Chief of Staff explained to me. So this is secondhand information. But I believe what was shared, and it was shared multiple times, is that the stakeholder did approach Bennett's office, and as you're aware, that office has been holding the reins, kind of done the heavy lifting on the NCA. And so there was, my understanding, some initial conversation with the office and proposals that went back and forth, but unexpectedly, or For what reasons, it wasn't made clear to me, but that conversation got abrupted and stopped. And so the bill was pushed through the Senate committee, but without any consideration on this interest. Now, I'm sure you're all aware that Congresswoman Boebert is very pro-energy. And so this is a concern when you have an energy consideration that was, by the Chief of Staff's words, kind of steamrolled. That's not my words. So that concern is being addressed now in the House committee, the committee that you wrote the letter to. And so in order to preserve the bill language as is, my understanding from this morning's conversation is that there is an amendment that is in the works to go with the Congresswoman's bill, and it would be the request that that is the version that will be considered and passed. So the amendment is to incorporate this consideration of this clearly late to the table, but still legitimate stakeholder. So there's some red flags on the subject of uranium also when it comes to the NCA, and I'd like to address that later. But in answer to your question, Commissioner, she is absolutely supporting the NCA and absolutely opposing the monument without question. And additionally, the effort and the attention that this is receiving is high caliber, very hands-on, and working diligently to create that amendment that will allow this to proceed. I'd look at it as a last bump in the road, and rather than just throw the hands in the air and say, forget it, you weren't at the table before, this is not something that can't be corrected and addressed, and Congresswoman Boebert's office is working with the committee to make sure that it is corrected and addressed, and in a way that won't sacrifice the timing concerns that we have, especially with the monument issue, which we can talk about later. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I guess, but one of the issues too is I'm going to dispute the fact that the small miners has always had a place at the table if they wanted to be here. And we got a letter of recommendation for the NCA from the small miners group. And yes, you're correct. This other outfit is late to the table. I think there's 3%, and I might be wrong, so correct me if I am. 3% of the uranium leases that this new company has is within the NCA. Everything is outside of that for the most part. Why is that an issue? And if they had a valid active claim, it's still covered by the NCA. It would still be a viable use. So I don't understand where all of this is coming from. I think, John and Amber, we all pushed to get these letters of support. We got them. And then I know that John's had conversations with the other uranium company. Let's just go one step back. If this went monument, nobody's mining, period. This monument covers all the uranium resources in that part of the country. It would be under that monument. What's going to happen then? We've got a great bill. It protects landowners. It protects miners. It protects grazing rights. It protects recreation within that canyon. And why that's a bad thing, I don't know. This thing, how long has it been, John? 20?
Depends on when you start talking. 20 years, 14 years.
It's just, and we worked with Amber and her group, every group involved, and we finally come to an agreement throughout. The Ute tribe jumped on board. We're ready for it. We protected Native American rights down there, and they're, all of this. I mean, I think we covered everything we could cover. And then, like you say, we get a latecomer to the game that has 3% interest in that canyon that could be resolved. But it shuts the whole program down until it's resolved. And I don't know what kind of timeline we got between getting an NCA approved or losing it to a monument, but I'm totally opposed to the monument. I think it's a land grab's what it is, and we're gonna protect our rights in that river corridor and the
So-
uses.
So I have a,
Was there an issue with litigation in between the introduction into the Senate and into the House?
Okay, the question that was asked is, was there an issue with litigation? That reference was not raised in any of the conversation. So I can't say no, but I can certainly say it has not been even half mentioned. So this is the first I've heard that word come out. My understanding is it was more to make sure that the assets were considered through an amendment. And I heard it was 14%, not 3. Now that could be incorrect.
that's,
And then when you talk
That's
about
correct.
percentage, just as a reminder, again, trying to keep all this in context, 14% of land or area is not the same thing as the value of the asset that might be contained there. So it is an issue, an energy issue. But I think you've identified the kind of hidden question, which is the problem here. We need a timeline. We need to know what is the timeline and some assurances that the NCA is going to be ahead of a potential monument. And so that is just the gray area that we're in momentarily. And that is only because the wording is being developed for the amendment. But as soon as that is approved and finalized, then we will be able to give some timing. But I do know that the will to pursue this aggressively through the committee to the full extent possible is absolutely where the Congresswoman resides right now. And so I wish I could give you a timeline. I feel the pressure as well. We get calls all the time. Mostly from what you mentioned earlier, which is that people are confused about the NCA, and now with the monument, they just assume it's the same thing. So there's a lot of education going on, but the timeline for the NCA out of the House is, I understand, the bottom line question. So I'm aware of it. I wish I could give you an answer immediately, but I can tell you that it is a strong focus and that it is not being disregarded. You haven't been left behind. This is an important issue for the Congresswoman. She wants to see it done right. And the delay that you're concerned about is not necessarily as much of an issue, perhaps. It becomes an issue because of the monument. So that's created this added level of pressure, and we're very aware of it. And I'm personally, and I've looked at this and we've discussed it at the district level, that the subject that's kind of the sticking point here is this uranium issue, yet we're also finding out that other recent monuments, like the one in Arizona, what they're finding is the big problem there has to do with uranium. So there's a bit of a coincidence on the difficulty about uranium at this moment. So that update I've given you is all that I have. I did find out additionally this morning, though, that the wording in the NCA is standing, and they're working on just a carefully crafted amendment so that this last consideration is incorporated.
question for you, and correct them if I'm wrong, either one of you guys, but we obviously understand that the number is 14%, or the last maps that we've seen is right there at that 14% mark. And obviously, if that 14% is the richest resource underneath it, we understand that, and we're also pro mining. But the way the language is crafted right now is that it still protects that. Am I correct? Because the way the language was put in there and put into play, if that 14% is the richest 14% that they can possibly mine, it's protected. Now it has to go through a process, and I guess that's where our confusion, or my confusion, is. The way this language is, it is crafted to where that is all protected. So whoever wants to take that.
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in on that. I mean, so when we crafted the NCA, we put in place what's called a valid existing right clause to say that any valid existing rights can move forward. And the way that works with mining is not always super straightforward, but there is a process for a company, in this case, the one we've been discussing, that, they can prove they have a viable mineral resource there. And they told me they were 100% confident that their mine manager said that they could do a validity examination and prove up that there's an economic viable resource there. So if that's the case, they then, can proceed and have production even if they were included within the boundaries of the NCA. If the bill was passed and law, they could do that. So, and as you said, there's 14% of their resource. It's the resource closest to the river, which is why it engenders some concern. And of course, when we became aware of this, I brought it to the steering committee, as is our office's custom. We don't operate in a vacuum on this bill. We always, put things on the table for the full steering committee from all 3 counties and others that we work with on this. So, we talked about it, and we thought that was the best way forward. And I think, unfortunately, the company disagrees. If it is okay, could I just talk about a couple other things right now, Wally? I just want to, I appreciate Naomi's characterization that the company was steamrolled by the Senate, or this interest was steamrolled, but I would respectfully push back on that. The U.S. Senate committee that considered this legislation took uranium concerns very seriously, and it was one of the main issues that was discussed as part of the legislative process on this bill. On that committee are 2 of the staunchest proponents of uranium in the United States Senate, Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming, Senator Mike Lee of Utah. Senator Barrasso is the ranking member on that committee, the top member for the committee, and nothing moves forward on that committee without being vetted by he and his staff and very carefully considered. And so they did a lot of work on uranium, a lot of discussions with uranium interests, a lot of discussions with our office as the bill sponsor, and they did a lot of research on uranium resources in the Dolores River Basin. They took a look at that. They heard the concerns from the company. They heard the position from local government here, the correspondence you all had sent. And at the end of the day, they agreed with, I think, what we've always said here locally, is that we have a good balance here. We have a hard-fought compromise that wasn't easy to get to, but we have an agreement between all parties on the ground to do an NCA, and they decided to back that, and they backed it in a unanimous fashion. So every senator on the committee, Republican and Democrat, supported the bill. So I would respectfully push back against the characterization that anyone was steamrolled, and that these are folks that don't look out for the uranium industry, because there are a lot of uranium proponents on the bill and or on the committee, and I don't think they would have supported the bill. So the other thing I would say is, there's always been pro-uranium interest at the table in this discussion. I think a lot of the county commissioners over the years that have represented their counties on this issue have been very pro-uranium. We've had former uranium miners that sit on our committee. We've had energy interests on our committee. So I think uranium has always been on the table as an interest, and I think the small miners have watched this conversation for years, and the fact that their board endorsed the NCA, again, I think speaks to the fact that it was a good product.
Back to you, Naomi. Is that
Sure.
kind of what the Congresswoman is trying to shore up or bolster more?
Well,
Is that?
I think it'd be fair to go ahead and reference, some context. There is a difference between achieving unanimous agreement from a body that's the size of the Senate, and it is a much different consideration over on the House side. And so rather than push this forward without this amendment, because the amendment would resolve the open question. So giving it a clean, no open question position is more favorable. There is less argument, and you know how things are. You can easily just say a negative thing, and then that becomes the sticking point for dispute and disagreement and of no vote. So cleaning that up before it goes before the body has a lot of merit and value when it comes to the final passage, which is the ultimate goal. And so it is different when you're trying to get the House, the body in the House to pass an agreement. And while it's wonderful that there's already a version together, the amendment is going to, that Congresswoman Boebert and her chief of staff are working on, is going to take away the one snag that could be picked against the NCA. And so, again, we're down to that context of timing. I mean, if the amendment had already been put forth and we had a calendar date for review of the committee, it wouldn't feel so uncomfortable. But the pressure is created by this monument designation. So please keep that context in mind. And we do understand that this is urgent. It is not something that is being ignored. So the objective is that when it goes in front of the House, there's no reason for them to pick apart, and it should receive, a fair consideration and passage. That's the goal.
When will you be able to share the text of the amendment with the steering committee and
Yeah,
local
John
government.
just asked the question. He'd like to know when the text of the amendment can be shared with the steering committee, and that's a great question. I asked the chief of staff and let him know that that was likely to come up, and so that question is not entirely in just one person's control. These are legal documents that need to have careful review, but the process is being pushed. So I don't have a specific answer, but I will be sure to provide notice to all the commissioners and to the steering committee. Once that language is available, it would obviously be shared with Senator Bennett and Senator Hickenlooper's office, but we're not pursuing it. It's not being pursued also, again, in a vacuum. I mean, the awareness of the added heat behind this because of the monument is very front and center as well.
Okay. So, yeah, everything is a timeline right now to us because we feel, I think I can speak for you all, by the end of this year, 2024, if for some reason we can't get this thing sealed and signed, I believe that the monument is going to have traction, a lot of traction in 2025 to then reach through and to kind of do what they're proposing right now in Montrose and Mesa County. Is that a fair analogy of that?
Well, there appears that there's been some conversation that's taken place, prior to this that has, indicated that the Congresswoman isn't on board or that this could lapse. This is very important to her. This is an objective, a this year objective, not, well, oh, gee, I didn't. No, this has been always an objective. I do want to point out that Congresswoman Boebert worked in collaboration with Senator Bennett's office and Senator Hickenlooper's office, even when there were people on that stakeholder committee that are not typically considered friends of energy. And some of those prior stakeholder organizations have now jumped ship and are now pushing the NCA, the monument. So, for example, San Juan Citizens Alliance, which was a member at the table, is now working actively, per the newspaper article, for the monument. So it was, from the onset, the Congresswoman was aware that there were organizations that were somewhat contrary to keeping our lands open for energy, open for access, but pursued it for the same reason that she is adamantly still pursuing it, and that is because this is what the stakeholders want. This is what the members of the community want, and you've earned it to be done because it's come to this final end point. And so the notion that she's not caring anymore is just not accurate. I can tell you that this is a conversation that takes place with both the DC and the district staff, but they are the ones that would be able to give that timeline. So I really do apologize. I am with you. I would like to be able to give you that timeline.
So what would be reasonable to ask for a timeline? Because right now we're sitting back here and we're holding on to something without a timeline, and it's very uncomfortable for us where we sit because we have this pressure of this monument and everything that's gaining traction towards it. So, and I know you probably can't answer this question,
Well,
but
I
I'm going to ask
can.
you to move it forward.
I can answer.
To ask.
I
what,
can answer.
What kind of a timeline, really, even just a...
So here's what I'd like to answer. This morning when we spoke with the DC staff, and we are also communicating with the Grand Junction office that is hearing those Mesa and Montrose County concerns. And this morning when we spoke, this meeting hadn't taken place. We did let the DC office know that we're going to sit down and hear from the commissioners. So by virtue of you taking the effort to set the meeting and invite the participants and the stakeholders, then I can go back to the DC office and share what you've shared with me today and ask more specifically, can we have some sort of a timeline? What is the typical delay or what is the typical drafting, timeline? So do we have some typical ideas? And of course, I know the objective is a completion of that draft so it can be shared, and also seeing that on the committee calendar as a conversation that needs to take place so it can pass that committee. So it's not just the draft language, it's also can we get on the committee before the committee schedule gets too full? So those are the two questions that I'll pursue getting an answer for you. You want that answer, I want that answer, and I can share with the chief of staff the formality of the meeting, that the effort that went in, and see if we can't get a little bit more data on where that process is.
Okay. Because I think right now, for us in the three counties, Montezuma, Mesa, Dolores, and San Miguel counties, this really is our blocker from the monument at this point in time, until the year passes, and then we're facing a new year in 2025, which hopefully we get this done prior to that, and that's just a conversation that we don't even have to have. So a timeline, thank you, I appreciate it, would be great. I think if you want to take this one, Floyd, I'll let you, or Commissioner Copenhaver, not to put anybody on the spot, but I think one of the questions you raised earlier was, what is the big difference between the monument and the NCA that we have been working on for a number of years? I'm going to let you guys talk about this, because obviously I have not been at this table for the 14 or 15 years, just so that everybody knows that. However, I do know the protection that it poses to us in regards to what the monument might create. And again, I don't have a lot of information on the monument, other than how large it is and the designation that it may hold with it. So, or maybe even,
I can, this community got in an argument about whether to have an NCA or a monument out here west of us before. At least with the NCA, we would have had a little bit of say how it was managed. We have absolutely no say on this out here. And nothing against bicycles or anything, but whenever they decided that they were going to change the proclamation that Bill Clinton wrote out and said there was no off-road mechanized travel, they changed the definition of a road so they could put bicycles up Sand Canyon. We had no say. We couldn't say. We told them, that's not right. You can't just change the proclamation like that. That's not the definition. They did. They did it anyway. We have absolutely no say on this thing out here. None. At least with an NCA, if we have a group that can write this plan and stuff, at least we can have some say over it, even if they just meet once a year before they make changes in the management of this thing, at least we can have some say about it. If we have a monument down there, we have nothing to say about it. It's there, and I'll guarantee you what, if that monument's put over this wild and scenic suitable river, without, I just think it's nothing but trouble for our water in the future here. I'm not talking about right now, talking about in the future of this community, because I think it's a serious problem. Because every time they study that wild and scenic suitable river down there, they come up with more outstanding remarkable values, and the managers of this canyon have to manage it to maintain those outstanding remarkable values. They're not supposed to let those go away. That's what's in this Wild and Scenic Suitable River Act. So if they have to maintain it for that, and the last time they studied it, one of the fish is one of the outstanding remarkable values. Well, what do fish need? Water. So if you don't believe it doesn't put our community in jeopardy, I think you're fooling yourself. Because I think with that federal project, and if those fish need water, they'll probably get water, whether we like it or not. And that's just my opinion about the whole thing. And that's why I've been at this table ever since this thing started in 2008, trying to get this thing done, so at least we would have some say over the manage of it and get that wild and scenic off of that river. And that's what this bill does. And I think you can tell your boss, we need this done. For those reasons right there. This community is at jeopardy, as far as I'm concerned, if we lose that water. And their community's at jeopardy, because there's a lot of their water goes out to their community. And I think this is something that she needs to understand, how serious we are about this, because it's not something I take lightly, because I think that's putting this whole community at jeopardy.
Well, if I can respond. So the wild and scenic, the concern about the risk of a wild and scenic designation was the main reason that from the onset, the Congresswoman was paying close attention, because Commissioner Copenhaver did say correctly that that restriction becomes very onerous. And the idea that a monument, even if they say at the front end, oh no, we're going to keep it open, we're going to do, they can make all kinds of promises, but we've seen in other examples that once a monument designation exists, it becomes in the hands of the agency to then, dictate the management. And so the threat of adding restrictions definitely is there in the case of a monument. And the threat of the wild and scenic is what definitely caught the attention for the Congresswoman to come on board, but then followed with the vast amount of support from the community. And so the awareness, again, we are in a context of all of a sudden having a pressure in this process that didn't exist 6 months ago on the threat of the monument. So I definitely want to restate very clearly that the monument is absolutely something that the Congresswoman is very opposed to, and is also aware of that timing restriction or timing concern. Again, and I even tried to get an answer on timing for you on the monument. Can we get some idea about where the federal government or those powers that be are standing in relation to their pursuit of a monument? And fortunately, there's not so much conversation that there's much to report, other than our local stakeholders here that have jumped ship off the NCA and are now pushing the monument. But that is a very small group in retrospect. So the understanding, please, for the community, she is very opposed to the monument designation. She is aware of the threat of the wild and scenic, and she is not giving up at all. And I don't know where that idea came from, but she's diligently working to clean up the last objection that could happen on the NCA and have it be in a condition that will pass the House and pass through that committee, pass the House. So as soon as we have that timeline information and the verbiage, it will come out to you. But you've done a great job of expressing the urgency, and none of this is not expected, just so you know. All right, so this has been expressed with this formal meeting. I can ask for a little bit more tighter information on timeline, but this is not something that the Congresswoman's just disregarded by any stretch. It's a very big focus.
So isn't it true that if it went into a monument position, that the federal government has an inherent water right?
Well, let's just step back a couple steps. In order to pursue a monument designation, this is part of the Antiquities Act. And while there does not have to be, you can use that power of the pen to create the monument. So those kinds of studies and things that would normally be required for such action are sort of leapfrogged over. The one aspect that is not leapfrogged over is that they would need to come into the community and have those community engagement meetings. That is a step, to my understanding, that is part of pursuing the monument. So there is clear opportunity for this community to speak up in numbers and volume should we get to that point. But I understand the objective here for this group, and the objective for the Congresswoman's office as well, is to get the NCA passed so it becomes moot.
But still yet, isn't there an inherent water right that goes along with a monument for the federal government?
I would like to answer that question in detail, and I don't have the exact answer other than what I have read in the recent newspaper articles about the monument issues out of Arizona, and that is one of the concerns that was referenced in that article. So it's a recent example of problems that an area is having with a monument designation and all the intricacies of that, which included uranium and did incorporate concerns about water as well.
Yeah.
From a technical standpoint, Floyd, it would depend on the exact language in the monument proclamation. I mean, the Campbell Monument that Senator Bennett worked on up in Eagle County had very specific language that said, new federal water right was established or implied, and in that case, we worked very closely with water right holders there. amongst them Aurora Water and Colorado Springs Utility, and then the local, Eagle Valley water group as well to ensure that no new federal water rights were created. But it does depend on the exact language used in a proclamation.
And do we have the opportunity to put that language in there? MVCI has the water rights, basically. DWCD carries a secondary or whatever water right. If the government was to pull water, where would it come from? And it wouldn't come from MVCI. It would come from DWCD. That is what our irrigation water comes from. And I might be way off base here, but I'm just going to say it anyway. With the Colorado Compact on the river and the water that flows down that river, I could see the federal government retaining a water right and releasing it down the river to get it down to Arizona. My opinion is that's just really putting our farmers and ranchers in jeopardy to lose any kind of water for their livelihoods here. And if it's an inherent water right, which it sounds like, we lose all the way around. We lose our uranium. We lose our grazing. We lose the whole thing. With the NCA, we're protecting the valid and existing water rights. We're protecting the grazing rights. We're protecting the land use for our people. If we go under the umbrella of a monument, we lose everything. Within our river in Dove Creek, that's one of our water sources for the community. What's going to happen with that? I mean, is it going to be protected, or do we lose our water rights on the river? This monument thing scares me to death. And the push needs to be straight and forward, like you explained. Get the NCA pushed through the House. That'll stop that monument. But where do we stand? And Jim brought it up right. I mean, what's a timeline? I mean, I haven't even heard a timeline of when they could enact a monument. I mean, with a stroke of a pen, Biden can make it a monument tomorrow. What's going to happen? I mean, we've pushed and pushed and pushed this monument. I know Bennett's office, Hickenlooper's office, even Lauren to start with, has been behind it, and now we've stalled. We're waiting for new language. We're waiting for this. When I really felt that the language within the NCA was straightforward, but it stalled us, regardless, right or wrong. We're stalled, and if we stall long enough, they're going to step over us. That's my concern.
Okay, and your concerns definitely are heard, and they were forecast before this meeting. This timing is a concern. I will say that how much better would it have been if this would have been addressed in amendment before it was pushed through the House. And again, as Mr. Whitney was saying, this went through the Senate unanimous, but this is a different body. So with a larger number of eyes on the language, and we don't want to open up the opportunity to give it basically a black mark. Everything about the NCA is checks all the boxes. And this last open box, cleaning that up so that the larger body of the House has no reason to oppose, is the objective that we want. We don't just want to push it through and then allow there to be, a battle over an issue that really can be resolved by the language through the House committee process. And so that's what we're waiting on. I understand the timing. I want to say for the fourth time, again, that Congresswoman Boebert is very opposed to this monument. And she's come out and she's made a public statement in opposition to the monument. I don't know where Bennett or Hickenlooper's office stands on that, but Congresswoman Boebert is very aware of the timing pressure that it creates, and she is very opposed to it. So let that be clear. And then also I agree, I think this really needs to come out of this meeting, that the community at large is confusing the two and thinks them to be one and the same. And so that educational component is really important. So long as the threat of the monument is there, people need to understand what Commissioner Copenhaver was saying, that it adds threats to our water, it adds threats to the overall control of the asset, and that would be over the monument boundary area. So again, very opposed to the monument, very public about that opposition, and very committed to getting the NCA this last box checked so that the opposition won't really have a leg to stand on, and there is an ability to push this forward. And while I wish I could give you a timeline, I can say that there is clear intent that this is going to be done this year. That is the intent of the office. It's not a to the side issue. It is a front and center issue. So I hope that gives you some reassurance. I want to get the timeline for you as well as you wanting it for me. And so I'll do my best to share that back and find out what details I can give. But I hope that to change your mind on the notion that she doesn't care anymore, that is incorrect. The Congresswoman is very concerned about this and trying to clean it up because it went through the Senate without addressing this issue. I understand that you have no concern on it, but it leaves an open question mark where one did not prior exist, and there is a pathway to fix it and to still have this a strong bill that is passable and that isn't going to have the kind of objections raised. So we want to address it. This is an issue on the uranium side. Again, I want to draw attention that the people that are having difficulties with monuments now also are really upset over the uranium subject. So to let that be the subject that is the hang up at the end does not create good optics for what is a very, very good bill. So let's clean it up. Please just give time for me to get back a report, but let the committee in the House, the Natural Resources Committee, work with the Congresswoman's office and get a tightly worded amendment that can be accepted and passed with understanding that all the boxes have checked. All the boxes have been checked.
And I understand that. So I'm going to back up just a little bit. And again, I thank you for your assistance while I was back in D.C. So we were back there just before Valentine's Day, and we were able to meet with the Chief of Staff. So just from my standpoint is that every 30 days, if we don't hear something, you're going to be hearing from us again because this is of an urgency to us. So that was February. This is now, we gave them about 40 days. And still haven't seen anything. Floyd referenced it as a stall. I don't know if it's a stall or a tactic, and that's okay, but I'm just letting you know, I think that from us, we're going to be coming and asking for answers a minimum of every month because we need to know what's happening. And then lastly, I'm looking at the time, what can we do? I mean, we don't want to just sit here and try to pressure. What do we need to do on our side to make things move better or quicker so that we can get this hearing called for? Is there anything that we can do?
And I appreciate that. And that was also incorporated into the letter that you sent the committee. And so when you say that 30, 40 days, my understanding is that the time that you visited the DC was kind of when it was revealed that this wasn't that this was still an open issue and that there would need to be an amendment, and that process is work. So what has happened in the last 30 days has been work on the very thing we've discussed, which is the tightly worded amendment that will take away that last open box and put all the checks where they need to be. I agree. I think 30 days, requesting an update in 30 days is appropriate, and I can express that to the DC office, that is a request for both the commissioners and something that the committee will also need to have. And so I think that's reasonable. As far as what else you can do, I think today you've done it. You've called the meeting and put all the cards on the table about the concerns. And really, I think what it filters down to is the timeline. And that timeline becomes far more of a concern because of the proposed or the potential of a monument. And so I will do my best to make sure that the Chief of Staff hears this clearly. I'll prepare a memo from this afternoon's meeting and share that we will be expected to provide an update in 30 days, but preferably before 30 days expires, we will have an update for you. I can tell you that I check daily for the schedule for the committee about what it's looking like, how things are getting full, if they've put something like this on the schedule, and we ask daily in our morning meetings for updates. And so this morning, the update was, the specifics that the work is being done on the amendment, so it can be corrected in the House.
I hope that's going to come relatively quickly, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Again, I'm looking at the time. We typically try to make it only an hour for these meetings. We're a little over an hour right now. I'm going to let you wrap it up, John, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, sure. I mean, just to clarify, Michael Bennett's 100% behind this NCA. We've made it a priority for 14 years, and we have fought to get a hearing on the bill, to get it, voted out of committee. The Senator's 100% behind it. We are very hopeful that if we get it passed in the House, and thank you for your updates. Look forward to seeing the text of the amendment. I think that's the best way forward. We've already got it through the Senate committee. We get it through the House. We'd like to think there is a path to get it enacted this year. Some of that will be contingent on a larger public lands package coming together. I'm very optimistic that can happen. There are a number of senators on both sides of the aisle that have bills they'd like to see become part of a package. That's a larger negotiation between the committee and the Senate side and the House side, but we're very hopeful that will happen and come together, and we think there's a path to get this NCA enacted into law, hopefully by the end of the year. We really want to see that happen, and we think that's the best way to wrap things up here in the South. I know there's talk of a monument up north. We're taking the time right now in our office to listen to supporters and opponents, those who have concerns and those who are advocating for it. But down south here, I think we regard the issue as resolved. People came together here, they did the work, they sat at the table for some long meetings, a lot of nights away from home to do that work. We came to a good middle ground bill that I think everyone feels addresses their core interests, and we absolutely want to see that enacted into statute.
All right. Thank you. Commissioners.
Actually, that raises a final question, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Congresswoman Boebert is on the record adamantly opposed to the monument that's being considered, and I heard something different from Mr. Whitney. Is there a position for the senators in opposition or support of a monument, or are you keeping it open?
No, as I said, right now we are listening to the supporters and the opponents. There's a lot of supporters. We've got the city of Grand Junction that's advocating for a national monument, other elected officials in Montrose County, quite a few people that we've heard from. Thousands of our constituents have weighed in and said, we do want to see a monument up in Mesa and Montrose County that are advocating for that. We're going to take the time to listen to them. We've also are taking the time to spend a lot of time on the ground in Gateway and Natarita and sitting down with those folks who have very strong concerns that think a monument does not make sense. So we're having that conversation right now. So no final or formal position until we actually take the time to put our ear to the ground and listen to everybody in a real thorough manner.
All right. Commissioners, do you have anything else?
But I will clarify that is for the North, not the South. Again, I will reiterate, in the South, the NCA is the path. If the North had done an NCA, it would probably be resolved. As we know, at one point, some of those counties up north were part of the NCA. They chose to leave that process. So
Correct.
it's not
They
resolved
chose
there.
a different path in those two counties, and the path is that we have chosen with the three counties at the table right now are to get this NCA taken care of and passed. So, Commissioners, do you have anything else?
I like what I've heard here today. I think we've got a path forward. Thank you for everybody for their time.
I also support the guys' statements, and I'm also opposed against the monument.
So again, thanks to both of you. I do appreciate you all coming out and coming over. Again, we're just trying to, 30 days, we're just sitting back here like a patient father, I guess, whatever. But we just hope that we can get this thing taken care of, and we feel the pressures also of the outside forces that are coming at us, and we're just trying to make sure that we can get across the finish line. It's been a lot of work of a lot of people, and now it's in our hands, and hopefully we can carry this ball and get it across the finish line. So again, thank you all. Commissioner Lindsay, do you have anything else to add?
Just that we, at one time, were faced with the same issue that they are up there. We started out looking at an NCA out on the canyons and the ancients, and we fought and bickered and fought and meetinged and opposed, wrote letters and everything else. And when it was all the dust was settled, they decided to throw a monument on us. We were fortunate that we were able to have people in our RAC, our Resource Advisory Council, that got protections for everything except mining. But in those years, a lot of those have been eroded. You know, grazing's been eroded, access has been eroded. So I really want to see this NCA brought to fruition, because a lot of people put a lot of work into this, and I'd hate to see them rejected.
Appreciate it. Have a great day, and now you can go have some chili verde.